Okay. Uh, I'll just testing one last time. Am I loud and clear for the room?
Yes, you are.
Fantastic.
You're fine in the room.
All right, wonderful. Hello everyone. I'm Oliver or Ollie, and I'm Sanger's partnership manager here at Docker. So first and foremost, thank you for hosting us today during your software community meetup. Thank you for letting us interrupt your hackathon. Chris, who will introduce himself shortly, and I are really excited to discuss all things containers, all things Docker with you today. And hopefully, when we do this next time, I'll make sure it's an occasion where we can make our way up the M11 and meet with you in person. I imagine a lot of you have been using containers and Docker for a while. Don't worry if you haven't, but the partnership between Sanger and Docker started around 18 months ago. So there was existing adoption of Docker across the Institute. One of our key initial objectives was to formalize the deployment of the Docker platform to improve access governance to what was, a set of tools being used within projects all across Sanger. We've seen the partnership grow since. More developers, researchers, data scientists are adopting Docker, and from our side, we've continued to innovate what we offer, and that's part of what we're here to discuss today. I'm going to stop talking very shortly. We have around 1 hour together. We'll present for a portion of that time. We'll provide you with an opportunity to answer questions. Do feel free to, if you're in the Zoom especially, pop any questions in the chat. We'll obviously go around at the end for people in person to ask any questions. We'll start with the fundamentals or some fundamentals of Docker and containers with anyone a bit less familiar with what we do. But don't worry, if that is familiar, we'll move on to some best practices as well as an overview of your current subscriptions, features, and capabilities. So you're sort of fully aware of what there is to leverage in your day-to-day with Docker. We have a vision for the future. Software development is moving very quickly, so we'll definitely get to a couple of those items too, and are very keen to, answer any questions you may have in that regard as well. So, without further ado, let me introduce Chris, our distinguished solutions engineer, to get started with why Docker, why containers when it comes to building, sharing, and running software.
Thanks, Ollie. So I'm Chris. I'm an American who's relocated to Northern Ireland, actually, but I've been here for 5 years. Uh, Background doing a lot of stuff with IT security, DevOps, and also working with large institutions. Um, just to level set, I'm going to start with literally containers 101 for folks. Like, what are they? If you're just hearing about them, and then going to go from there, and really quickly touch on that. So I'm going to share out my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this okay, and folks can hear me. Great. So what is a container? You can think of them as, at the highest level, something like a smartphone app, just the ability to have a modular way to pack up an application and all of its dependencies and makes it easy to be composable. You can also use it to run services. So a lot of people first start using containers just to, hey, I need to run a service locally, and be able to stand that up and not have to worry about actually installing the tools and the software on your native system. You can just download a container to do that. What we like to think of it as is a container is a isolated process or processes running on a machine, and an image is the package of that. So you would download an image, and when it's running, it becomes a container. One of the first things that you have available to you all as members with a Docker desktop and Docker business platform is access to not only the hub, but unlimited downloads from the hub for any instances that you're using. So it makes it very easy to find and search for and find images. And you can also push images up here as well to private namespaces as members of the Sanger organization. You can then go to the next step. You found an image you want to use, you want to do some iteration on it. This is literally what it looks like if you just wanted to build an application inside Docker. Uh, Really what this is doing is using a Python library in Python 3.7, 3.12 in an environment, doing the installation steps. I like to think of this as uh, you have a project that you need to share with someone else, and especially in a language like Python, trying to diagnose, what is the packaging requirements, how do they make that work? Instead of having to give them a README that they have to go and do, you could commit all of those kind of first run document setup steps to a Docker file. You can use the build command to create an image out of that Docker file. And then you can push that up to the hub or an internal registry. And then that's really what you can then share with a colleague to be able to work with it. This has made uh, application distribution and release management so much easier in this world. I remember the days before containers as how you did server setup and installation and being dependent on people to deploy infrastructure for you, just so you can see if your application works. I'm gonna pause right there. Folks with me so far, I have a very tiny view of your big office in my window, so I will have to require Ollie to point out if I'm missing someone. Cool.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Thanks, Chris.
So what does this look like just using Docker in day to day? I'm going to stop sharing that and just quickly switch to not that view. Okay. So this is something more familiar, probably using VS Code or similar IDEs. I want to be able to work on an application. In this instance, I have a app running here. It's a Node application. I could be packaging this up and distributing this as an application, but I'm first going to use Docker as I need all the infrastructure to run this application so I can test it and work on it. That's where I'm using a compose file, which is a component of Docker. And it lets me just declare, earlier you saw that little example of running Postgres database from the command line. Well, if I need to do that all the time with this application, I'd love to just save that setting in place. Maybe I need access to an AWS resource. Again, I'm testing the app. I don't really care about using a live AWS resource. I just want to make sure my code that uses a S3 bucket has something present. Other tools, a wire mock tool, and then my application itself is using Kafka to do the actual configuration. So just to bring up that infrastructure itself, I can just do a Docker compose up, and it's spinning up all of these different services in my environment. I can see which services are running. I see I have my Kafka node. All of these things, I didn't actually have to do any like brew install or package installation of utilities. These are all happening inside these containers. And then I'm going to actually run my service, which is up and running and listening on a port. So now I can go ahead and switch to what that looks like of my application. I can just go here and start creating projects and using services. See, I've gotten an error message here, and so now I can start iterating on this. So it's a really quick run through of this, but just being able to have, these are all my backend services that I'm using. I need to share them out and distribute them to other people. And I want to be able to see this. Now, I'm using a command line tool, but it doesn't have to be. And so I will show you what that looks like also. So this is the Docker desktop application itself. You may see this, you may see the little whale icon in your menu bar. Some of the first things you can see in here is just an overview of all of the services that are running, anything that you've created, um, how things are working, what ports are. So instead of having to rely on command line utilities, you can jump in here and get a much more in-depth look of services or an application that you're using. You see the actual application logs, build. Again, this goes more into debugging your applications, but again, it's much easier than trying to remember a collection of command line interfaces. This is something that you have available to you as Sanger employees. It makes it much easier to hop around. So again, just really quick of showing, here's my compose file. These are all the resources I need to use in my application. Get it stood up and running real quick. I like to think of addressing these areas as, Docker desktop is, how can I develop and use containers on my machine? Docker Hub is how can I find and share those images? How can I download them? Where can I get them? Docker Scout, which I'll touch on in a little bit, is something that lets you introspect the contents of those containers and images, uh, not just what's in them, but specifically with the focus on security and compliance. Build cloud is an environment, is an option that you have. From talking to the team internally, this might not directly apply to you because you have internal cloud resources, but this is another way to spin up and make it easier to do your testing and similar with test containers. So I did just do a click through of Docker Desktop itself, but again, it's a ability to not just do Docker, and I've just been showing Docker work, but running Kubernetes and being able to deploy and test your Kubernetes applications is just a one-click option to do inside Docker Desktop. It's your portal into all of these services. You can just use everything, access most of these things as well in the web interface, but Docker Desktop's kind of an easier endpoint for this. And then on the security side, from an organization standpoint, there's features such as doing secure Docker Desktop configuration. So making sure that if you are downloading containers, if those containers have malicious code in them, you're able to isolate them and prevent them from, getting into other environments and kind of contaminating your build environment. So there's two areas you can do in this space. The first one I kind of touched on, which is just using containers for local development. That's very common. A lot of people just use it to have those tools up and running. That's what I was using it for. And then you have the other option, which is I need to bring in containers. I have my application, it's running, I have it running on my laptop. How do I get it from my laptop to production? And so the idea is, I need to build a Docker file. I need to pull in those resources and have those available. Then that lets me start doing those automations around that. And then from there, you can just continue to iterate on those steps. The fact that you can have a container in an application or an application in a container and then ship that out, have it go through testing, get the feedback, make changes, and not have to fight the actual platform. And you can just focus on your code optimizations or your tooling optimizations. A utility at your disposal today is called Docker init. It literally will walk you through what tools and languages and services you need for your environment. Just a really easy getting started guide of, hey, I have my Python. For anybody here who is not using containers, this is a really quick way to just get a Docker file running in your environment. the next side of this that I touch on a lot and talk to people, especially recently, is how you can also use Docker Scout. And Scout is our security tool in this space. And its purpose is to kind of walk you through what you're actually building. I like to think of containers as a really easy way to bundle up an application and make it easy to share and make it easy to distribute. You can put anything you want in a container, which is amazing and very powerful. But the problem is you can put anything you want in a container, which also makes it a security nightmare and can make it very difficult for everyone to kind of know what's in there if you're just taking someone else's container. And how do you determine that the person who is giving you that container or the container you're using is built by the person that they say they are, that image that you want to launch your application on or base on is secure, has low to no vulnerabilities in it. How do you get that insight into that if you're not the one who's built it yourself? That's really where our users are using a tool like Docker Scout. This is something that, again, is just included. You just have it at your disposal already. And I like to think of it as helping you build your kind of food label of what's actually in a container. Who built it, what are the environments, what are the dependencies, and then how you can work with it. Stop there and switch to this container environment. And I'm going to look at our demo client. I'm just literally clicking on it right here. And I'm able to get a quick analysis of what's in this client today. I can see that there's some possible CVEs present, vulnerabilities. Which ones are these? Looks like there's a Debian one related to glibc. Again, just easy for me to go in and say, oh, what is everything that's in this environment? Where is it from? Who built it? Is it the application? Is it from the base image that I'm using? Which part of my Docker file is that coming from? Is it from the node installation present? I can see from this view, it's actually not any, there's only one vulnerability in this space here. And if this looks familiar, we're literally mapping the line in a Docker file to where these assets are coming from. So the fact that there's a command here that is essentially installing node is the reason why this vulnerability is present. We even go so far as to give you recommendations on how you can set up and get fixes for them. Just gonna pause there for a second. Is this tracking or seem useful for folks in the audience? I think I see some heads nodding, either people falling asleep or agreeing.
Chris, I had a quick one. As you mentioned, this is obviously part of the current subscription that Sanger maintains. Is there anywhere else outside of Docker Desktop where this set of tooling to identify and remediate vulnerabilities can be accessed?
Yeah, this is actually something that is built into Docker Hub as well. So the same viewing, so you can view images in Docker Hub. You can integrate this into the Docker Desktop CLI tool. And also there's GitHub Actions and other integrations into other CI tools. So GitHub, GitLab, and other environments. So you can have policies in place to make sure that when you're working on a project, your CI pipeline, when it's doing a build, can actually flag and say, hey, this new Docker image that you're trying to introduce is going to introduce vulnerabilities. So you can access it all over the SDLC.
Yeah. One further comment I had on this, and this is from conversations I've had with John within the security team at Sanger, we're very conscious that we don't want to slow down what is ultimately very a fast-paced moving industry that you're working in, especially when it comes to research. I think where Scout can provide assistance is, this isn't a top-down mandated security policy necessarily. This is a very quick way for a developer or someone working in Docker Desktop or the command line to identify something, remediate it in a few clicks, and go on about their work. With the assurance that there's a critical vulnerability or critical vulnerabilities have been removed from a piece of software or its dependencies. We have a
Yeah.
question. How do we compare it to tools like Trivy, Grype, etc.? Chris, one for you, I think.
Yeah, we have similar scanning capabilities and services as those tools. We integrate with them. We have actually tooling that complements working with them as well. Um, I, I don't see these really as replacements. One thing that is nice about this is something that is integrated onto Docker Hub as well. So you can actually have a policy set at the Docker Hub organization level that says, these are the specific things that we worry about, and not just uh, CVEs, but also compliant like licenses. Like as a research organization, GPL3 licenses may not be a big of an issue versus you know fully for-profit software publishers who are building applications that they're selling to people, and they're worried about things like license leaking. So that's another level on here. It's not just vulnerabilities, but it's also this package you're using, this library you're using doesn't meet a organizational compliance policy around what license you can use. But I use because I end up talking to people about Scout all the time. I actually have Trivy and Grype installed as well. But having Scout present is just very useful from the debug option available here. And it's one less tool. If you already have Docker present, then you have Scout present as well. So it helps save a step. Bring back my other slides. And this gives some of these views, by the way, of what Ollie had asked for earlier. Just being able to see the dashboard and the overview, and also have policies about this. So this is less for the developers, but from the security team, being able to just have a view over your fleet and know all of the applications that are being built or all of the images that we're producing internally for reuse. Are they out of date? How do I cut through that and kind of triage that information? And again, this going back to just a visual of how can I tie this into the other steps. One thing that we have introduced recently, which is everyone's been using image scanning, security scanning, and has started asking us for support on how can they just have images that they start with zero vulnerabilities, and how they can get that, how can they get access to those? So we've introduced as an additional feature something that if you're finding yourselves really wanting to ensure that you have no vulnerabilities and don't want to do that work yourselves, this is a service we're offering on top of that, which is just providing pre-built images with super minimal footprint, near zero CVEs, and guarantees for when there's updates to them. This is encapsulating all of the best practices on how to do secure image building, and is just something we're working on and adding. A big thing we've added in this space is that it's using two of the primary distributions most people are already working on, using Debian and Alpine. And yeah, And there's a few other options on here too, to doing extra customizations. But again, that's not directly um, here, but it always comes up when people start looking at Scout and they're like, hey, I don't want to do this work ourselves. So if that becomes an issue, we can talk to you about this.
So Chris, well, I'm going to ask a question, but obviously I know the answer, but for the benefit of the audience. Okay, so hardened images exist as something separate, but within the current subscription that Sanger has, how can people, Hub is obviously the largest marketplace for images in the world. I think we have something like 11, keep me honest, 11 billion image pulls per month at this stage, total.
Yeah,
Um,
something.
where can people find content from trusted sources on Docker Hub?
Yeah. So Docker Hub has a few options. There's really Docker certified images, which are, or Docker certified publishers, sorry, which are publishers that we've identified as the right people to go to get open source images from, and their utilities, and they're also verified. So it's an actual entity. We know who they are. They're already building images to best practices. And see if I can pull this up real quick. And easy to find and view these areas. So things like MySQL is an official image. Um, we've worked with the MySQL team and built these out, and there's a whole collection of other ones in this area. As subscriptions to Docker as well, you have unlimited pull requests for this. And really what that means is you can create for CI builds, any of that other stuff, uh, you can create organization tokens to put in those workers, and you don't have to worry about any rate limiting when pulling from here. So if you've run into that in your environments, um, it may just be that you don't have a authorized session with us, and we've made it easy with org tokens that can be kind of Sanger-wide tokens that are just, I just need to pull stuff from public repos. That's something you can request from your teams internally. Makes it easier to just pull down and not have to worry about hitting any throttling. So pause there for a second. Are there other questions? So you saw a little bit of this, and this is more of our future statements, but things that are available that you can use in Docker Desktop today. Some of these are, um, which is really just exposing and making it possible to use AI to help simplify the application workflows. We have a tool called Gordon that you can use to actually help analyze a Docker file and update it, fix it, get migrated to it. You can actually run LLMs and use Docker to do this. If you're already using a tool like Olama, it may seem very similar. We, again, big companies who are using these just want one less tool to use. But the big benefit about this is our MCP toolkit, which allows you to then start having those models interact with services that you may be developing yourself. And lastly, a way to kind of use that compose file, what I showed earlier, but instead of using it to distribute stuff for an application, you can now start building your agentic apps as well, and dictate, what model do you want to have present, what tools do you want to have in an MCP environment, and then your actual application itself that might be interacting between the agent, those tools, and the services themselves. On the security front, these are things just coming down the roadmap for our Docker desktop or Docker business subscriptions, of being able to get in and have things like admin controls around these utilities and services, and being able to have restrictions on which agents and tooling is present. Stop that for a second and see if I can pull up. Okay. So I'm going to pause there. I know I've run through a ton of content right now. One area I wanted to touch on was jumping back to that Dockerfile building and how do you do some optimizations in that space. Which is the ability to build applications and starting to deliver Docker files as a what we call a multi-stage image. Realize I'm jumping back quite a bit, but this is an area I think that touching on this helps with thinking about security in general, and building more secure environments. So you can start with something as simple as, here's my image, what we showed before, but you can actually have a stage where, when it comes to running my actual code, I don't need everything in there. So I can go into my final image, and because I've already had another stage that's doing my install, I can just say copy from dev, copy my application and my source, and run. So it lets you break up the environments in space here. We can drop some links in the chat for folks as well. Specifically, if you want a guide on how to go through multi-stage images. Are there folks in the audience who are doing multi-stage images today? Is this something familiar? Are you just using one Docker file that declares everything in it? You go top to bottom and it's like 5 gigs of stuff, or?
We've had some people nod in the heads and some people shaking the head, I think, in the room. So there's a
Okay.
mixture in the room.
So for the folks who are sitting there wondering why are my Docker files so giant, the thing that you want to look into is what's called multi-stage images. And what that lets you do is cherry pick the stuff off of your work that you actually need. So if you're, in this case, I am doing an installation with the tool Node. When I'm actually running my application, I don't need all my dev tools present. I just need my source code, and that's why I can go into my environment and say, okay, from my dev stage, just copy the source code. Don't copy anything else. Start with a Node image that just has Node and nothing else. I'm going to copy the code that was deployed by that dev stage, but I don't need those tools anymore. They run once and they're done. And then I can pull them down to the last part and then actually have the actual application itself run. And what ends up happening is Docker will throw out everything above this. So in this environment, this example I'm showing here, my prod image throws out anything built from this area that isn't explicitly copied with this copy command into my final environment. We have great guides on how to walk through this. We have a tool called Gordon, which is, for some people, they found this useful. A nice benefit of this too, when you're thinking about security, is this image usually has much fewer packages, much fewer vulnerabilities to begin with. And the chances are, if you do see a vulnerability flagged by, Trivy or Grype or Scout, it would be in the code that you're working on yourself. So like, oh, this package is vulnerable. I can change that package and figure out how I have to change my application code versus something that's coming from that base image. So in this example, this node image that I'm using that has node on it, if there's a vulnerability there, then that means I have to figure out how to rebuild or repackage or patch that base versus, oh, it's my library. I just have to jump to a new version. A benefit of tools like Scout and, again, Trivy and Grype is the ability of having them scan your tools in real time. I don't know if people have been paying attention to the fairly large node community package issue that happened last week, where some very creative people managed to get their hands on the credentials to some core packages in the node environment and able to, of course, as everyone does, put in code to hijack people's Bitcoin transactions. But what that immediately meant is everybody had to sit around and run around and determine what applications did they build and did those applications have this vulnerable code in it. And that's, I like to think of as a fairly concrete reason why about having something like SBOMs, those bill of materials, those lists, the tools like Scout and other tools generate, makes it easier to just find that information and know, and just triage to see what's there. Pull up a few reference pages for folks. So we have an entire guide section, which includes walking through in more in depth about the areas that I've just been talking through. And again, they're just simple, learning sessions, great ways to pull little nuggets of information out. Makes it easier to pick up specific things. And you can even filter by language, so you can see which of our guides are specific for Python, which ones are specific for Python, and maybe if you want to start using our tools with some AI frameworks, even examples to do that. And yeah. Other questions or folks from the audience? We have give folks about 15, 20 minutes for questions now.
I'll come around with the microphone if we have a question.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the talk. Over the past year, I've seen companies which subscribe to the OCI standard for containers push to have containers defined as JSON files, in particular the dev container format. Is this something that you could see a dev container being turned into a Docker file, or similar ways of persisting something like a dev container JSON into something that is reproducible in CI? Because right now they're designed for use in developer editors or things like Google Colab or Google Cloud.
Yeah, dev containers should ideally in the dev container specification, you should be calling out. You can actually reference Docker files for this is my Node platform that's running Node. Running an actual dev container itself through CI and adds a lot more complications, especially if you're not trying to test what the, because a dev container is going to include, going back to the security side of stuff, linters, libraries, tools that, unless you're literally offering that as a service to other people to use that dev container, don't really need to be tested or shouldn't need to be tested. So ideally, the dev container itself is referencing this is our application runtime tool where it makes it easy to make sure everybody's building the same artifact and then building the same application, if that makes sense. Like
it does. Like we see a user context which isn't in science we see scientists pass around these notions of what a container should be, but it can often come in the form of these dev container contexts. And they want to then be sure that they can reproduce that, and a collaborator in a completely different institution may provide it as that with no Docker file backing it. But then my challenge as an engineer is how can I turn that into something which is a reproducible, and the medium of the Docker file, then Docker build and Docker run facilitates that, but through a dev container medium, it doesn't. Do you see that something you might be supporting in the future?
I can see us trying to find some solution to that, but I also want to make sure that it's not because it sounds like more people are. It's like someone went like, oh, this is like a Jupyter Labs notebook I can pass around, but without having to force everyone to use Jupyter. Is almost what it sounds like. But yeah, that's we are looking into spaces around doing dev and dev reproducibility. I mean, this is kind of what we've always been in that space. And I know that we've worked with folks on other areas with dev containers, but I'd be curious to definitely chat more about this. If you have time later to, probably even just send us a note, because I'd be curious to see how we can help in your use case, because part of it may have to be, and I know educating researchers on a technology that isn't directly related to the actual research they're doing can sometimes be difficult, because you have to get their attention off of their thing to focus on the tool. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge to get that sorted. So I definitely understand the problem you have. I'm just wondering what are the best ways to solve it, which may not just be let's make it easy for them to kind of keep abusing dev containers maybe a little bit more than they should be.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll ask you later. Cheers.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions in the room? Oh, Ian, here is a question, John.
Hi. In the example files you showed, I don't think I saw any mention of like the default user, and I suspect it's just your demonstration environment. But what's the current best practice for what the default user should be in a container? Because I oscillate between a non-privileged root user and a root user depending on the context, but I think there are standards.
So usually the practices are non-root for anything running in production or anything running end user services. So if it's Postgres service, then you literally have a Postgres user defined. You can even define, the UID so it matches kind of what a standard Debian package would be for that instance. And root should really only be for if that container has to perform extra customization tasks of the container itself. So if it's installing packages or doing those components there. The best practices that we've kind of encapsulated in the hardened image product that we have follows that as well. So we offer literally dev variants, and the dev variant has a root account. Its goal is, hey, you're doing dev stuff, that's fine. But then you just fall back to the multi-stage image of once you're done doing all the dev stuff, installing whatever tools you need to compile your binary, you copy those artifacts over to a non-root image to actually do the execution. Does that make sense? Are there instances where you're feeling like you're having to run a root image in like a production
yeah, when
context?
developing, but then I want to make sure that's not active while in the CI, and then when it gets published to a registry.
Are you familiar with I was just asking, are you familiar with the target option when you're doing a Docker build?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So the in the final target in development, that layer of the image will not be in the. So I suppose our CI will build an image and then in the final stage add some extra stuff if it needs it. But in the main stage, it won't allow pseudo privileges to a non-pseudo user, someone who shouldn't have it, through the args and using arg flags. Um, is there any good ways of identifying cache busting or things that could be causing cache busting with your new AI tool? Finding cache busts, it's actually quite hard.
Yeah. Not specifically today. I think it is mostly on helping people analyze their existing Docker files, but not the build log outputs, which is really where you start having to go into the cache busting area. Because you're talking about literally just, oh, my CI building has now gone out the window because I've lost cache at build layer. So now I'm reinstalling packages I shouldn't have to and things like that, right?
Yeah, that's right. Typically, some scientist has added TensorFlow or Torch, and a build has now will take 30 minutes when previously it wasn't. But nothing has changed between iterative builds. So maybe like the Python installation is cache busting, but you can also have it sometimes with apt-get, which will cache bust in a way that you wouldn't anticipate.
Yeah. That is still the area that's still kind of a pain to diagnose on that front, unfortunately. But yeah, what I've seen folks try to do is figure out ways to intercept those upstream as possible. But again, you're supporting kind of a groups of scientists, which are probably harder to herd than engineers. So that can be difficult. But yeah, I will follow up with some of our architects to see if we have any best practices on that.
Hey, have we any more questions? I can't see Zoom from here. Are there any questions on Zoom?
No questions on Zoom, but we can probably take at least another one, maybe two from the room or on Zoom if anyone has any.
Last call for questions in the room. Oh, we're all stunned into silence. No? Oh. Going to Thomas.
Why is the logo a whale?
I haven't been here long. I remember when this came out. I've been doing this for that long. I believe it's just because we like shipping stuff. Ollie might know.
I mean, I'm kind of with you. I mean, shipping whales, it's not a direct link, is it? But you'll have to ask Solomon Hykes, who founded Docker in, I believe it was 2012, 2013. I mean, there's a few people here who are still at Docker back in the days. Maybe I'll post it on the internal Slack channel and see what responses I get. I guess it's a maritime theme about shipping, but that's what I've got.
Yeah. The puns keep continuing too. Internal tools are called Moby and things like that. So it's just what happens.
Excellent. I think we'll leave it there then, Chris and Ollie. Thanks ever so much.
Of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess for Sanger people, John is the sort of contact between the go between Docker and Sanger. So if there's any questions on there, if there's any specifics about what you've heard today that you're like, oh, how do I get that? Then John is the port of call with it within Sanger for that, and he can liaise with Ollie and Chris there if needed.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if I may, Andrew,
Sure.
John is the person to go to for if a lot of what we've discussed today around Scout, around Docker Hub, around some of the AI stuff with the model context protocol, a lot of this is available within your subscription, but obviously you do need a named user seat. So John is the go-to for that. But we also maintain a fairly active Slack channel. So if there are any questions that come up later today or tomorrow, feel free to share those with John or Andrew, and we can get back to those asynchronously. And more broadly, if you are, part of your subscription, support at docker.com. If you have any issues whatsoever with regard to bugs that need troubleshooting, we are sort of there for you with a 1-day response time. So you don't have to suffer in silence. We're here to support.
Just reiterating that really we have been able to use that a few times, and we've in fact been able to sort out some issues where due to changes in how Mac OS X was doing its Rosetta, that meant that Docker Desktop wasn't building some images, and we were able to get in fact a completely new version out, I think within a week, when Docker realized this was happening. We can, if you are running into issues with Docker that aren't things like Docker run, things like that, then we can absolutely reach out for support, and they're really good support.
All right.
I just wanted to follow up. I got a quick answer on the whale. And literally when Docker was an open source project, just a project, not a company or a product, we did a community logo competition, and everybody loved the whale, and that was it. Somebody illustrated a whale, and everybody voted on it in the open source community, and it stuck.
Go. All right. Thanks, Rod. Let's. Well, you might have been able to hear it. Let's give him a thank you. Super. Thanks ever so much, Ollie and Chris, for your time today. It's been great.
Likewise. Thank you for your time.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.